YouTube, Dawson Ryder here, and welcome to my review of the long-awaited, exciting day, the exciting release, The Batman. It comes out tonight. It's Thursday night. It comes out Friday, but you can see it Thursday night. I'm just kidding. It is my review for The Batman. Go see it. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, I did the Batman bit in the Dino Fury trailer, but this is going to be my review for Power Rangers Dino Fury Season 2, Part 1. And real quick here at the beginning, how this review is going to work is similar to the way I reviewed the first batch of Netflix episodes last year. I'm going to review each episode individually within the contents of this video, meaning right now I'm going to review episode 1, then I'm going to pause, go watch episode 2, come back, review episode 2, pause, go watch episode 3, and so forth. That way I'm able to give more individual focus to each episode, keep my thoughts self-contained, keep my speculation self-contained, and sort of simulate the experience of what it would be like to watch week to week without having you have to watch 11 episode review. Let's go ahead and get started, guys. So, review number 1 for episode numero uno. This is the season 2 premiere episode effectively, and I thought it was overall a pretty good episode. It moved pretty quickly to sort of set things back up, but it also didn't have to necessarily do a lot of groundwork. I think this episode and the Samurai Season 2 Super Samurai premiere felt the most Season 2-y, to use a really technical TV term. Don't use that unless you haven't gone to at least 15 years of school. By that I mean is a lot of the other seasons, you know, Dino Charge, Super Mega Force, Ninja Steel, kind of had a very repilot-y feel to their seasons where they kind of had to re-get their powers and set things up. Whereas this one, things were just kind of left open and normal, so it just felt more like a Season 2 premiere. Start off in honestly one of the coolest sequences in the series, in my opinion. I think that the stunts and everything have been so much better in this season than they have been in the Neo Saban era. It feels much more like the Disney era, much more memorable, makes the Rangers feel much more powerful. And we have that scene that we see from the new opening of Zato on a rooftop, and it's him coming into the battle on the rooftop. The Rangers all have an epic entrance. It's pretty quick, but it's a pretty cool sequence. And you see that the Rangers have come up with sort of a fun, like, game time system for fighting the beasts that they've been catching. And then we also learn that Amelia is late because she has been working at Buzz Blast as basically the interim regional manager because Jane and Jay Borg are out. There seems to be two plots for this, is that somehow Void Knight returned, and they're trying to figure out if Void Knight's returning or not, because right after this, the Sporks Beast of the Week seems to be focused on getting things back to bring back Void Knight. He can, like, travel through technology and stuff. He's actually kind of a cool monster. Like, to be honest, I don't remember very many of the Sentai monsters, so I'm sure I saw him in Re-Soldier, but I don't remember him. But I like his design, I like the way he works, I like his voice, because it's not the same sniveling voice number 3 we usually get from these. And he was kind of smart and just kind of a good villain. I just liked him. But basically, he steals the Rangers' Fix-It key after they trick them into fixing this flower guy's stand, which is clearly Weisel. I mean, I feel like I knew it was Weisel, or, what's his name? Slither. They knew that it was Slither. I mean, I feel like I knew it was Slither, but I'm like, if it's not, this is a really weird scene, because this dude's clearly a cartoon. We're only on episode 1, I'll see if they address it, but I really feel like they need to start addressing that Slither is tricking them. Like, dude, you're seriously Ash, and he's Team Rocket. It's like, every episode they're like, Team Rocket! They use that ruse to trick him because they need the Fix-It key to help bring things back. And then this is where the plots converge, is that they come up with this plan to lure the monsters out when Izzy realizes that the monster's spying on them via their webcam. And they lure him using the sword by pretending they're gonna blow up the sword, and then the monsters wind up getting the sword, and by the sword I mean Void Knight's Chroma Fury saber. And the whole thing is that Amelia's attention is so split, she allows the sword to be stolen by mistake, not to mention by turning on her phone, she lets the monster in, and it's like, it's Amelia's fault. So here's what I'll say. Yes, it is Amelia's fault. She shouldn't answer the phone because you're an idiot. It's going to come through there. Also, you know, you're splitting your responsibilities. However, it was idiotic for the Rangers to use the real sword as bait. Like, literally, it was stupid. I don't know if they could have come up with a fake one or something. Maybe they should have destroyed it beforehand. But yes, Amelia was primarily at fault, but I also think the Rangers' plan was stupid. The whole gist of that was that I guess Amelia needed to choose her priorities. I just found this plot to be really strange. I kind of liked it, and I thought it was going to be setting up for a longer arc for the season, where maybe we would just see Jane and Jay Borg in funny little scenarios across the world when Amelia called them, but set up Amelia as having more responsibility and it was going to be a longer running arc, and then it just kind of ended and it felt like a lesson that wasn't really a lesson. Also, it felt like one of those situations where they're like, do we really need 6 people for this? Like, I know it was important, But I feel like this was a different situation than someone just having a random thing to do. Like, she's in charge of the whole company. I'm like, you really couldn't have handled this? Like, remember when you were a team of 5 and you were fine? You didn't need 6 people? Remember when you were a team of 3? I just felt that was a little strange. I'm hoping that throughout the season, whether it's the half season or the full season, that might come back into play. For example, maybe Amelia will take over at the end. Like, Jane and Jay Borg will be like, you know, I saw how good you did in that time. We're going to actually hire you on to be a manager full time after the Ranger stuff is done. I don't know. Here it just felt weirdly out of place. Bottom line is, though, let's keep this short now since we have more episodes to review. Void Knight is back. They successfully restore his powers. It's really funny because the powers are all broken, and then we see Void Knight in that cool civilian outfit, which I feel raises a lot of questions and theories on its own. And he reconstructs the armor, and for a split second, I'm like, oh my god, has the Void Knight armor been a robot this whole time? And then I'm like, we've seen him take his helmet off, idiot! Anyway, Void Knight's back. It's the Rangers' fault for keeping this stuff around. And that's where we kind of have the status quo set up. Is Void Knight's back, and the conflict is basically the same as Season 1. Just 2 small notes before I move on to the second episode, because this is going longer than I wanted it to. I'm going to try to keep the other ones concise, and I'm wasting time by saying this. It was interesting to me that Zato called his saber a Chroma Fury saber. It makes me interested if they're going to address that later as a possible reason as to maybe why he didn't want to destroy it. Also, small joke bit. I like when they were talking about trying to find more information about Rafcon, and they thought about going to the library, and I think it was Ollie that mentions it, and Ion says, I don't know if I trust this library. He sounds shifty. Proves he's a true Parks and Rec fan. He doesn't like those punk-ass book jockeys. Overall, I would give this episode a go see the Batman out of 5. Seriously, that should be your priority now. But in all seriousness, 3 out of 5. I think it was a solid premiere. A little bit rushed, and I felt a little bit clunky with the Amelia stuff because I'm not sure what they're going for with it, but maybe we'll see in the future. But now, on to the next. Alright guys, time for episode 2 called The Festival. I'll try to be more concise with this one. The gist of this episode is that Wreckmate is back. It's like Ion's birthday, but on Rafcon they celebrate all the birthdays on the same day. No, you idiots. Don't you remember what happened when Jim tried to combine all the birthdays? It was madness. Basically, everyone gets gifts and cake or whatever, so Zato gets these temporary Dino chucks, which I'm like, oh my god, another original weapon, but I think the purpose of them was just for this plot, so I don't think they're necessarily something they're going to be trying to sell. And then Ion gets a bike because he's into bikes. Ion gets all overexcited about the nunchucks, and he tries to use them, and he accidentally damages them, not to mention all of the other, like, repair equipment in the place, which results in later him giving up his bike to create the Dino bike, because like in battle, the new juiced up Wreckmate is too tough, but the nunchuck's the only thing that can save him if only they hadn't been broken. But Ion gives up his bike so that they can create the new bike we've seen from the trailers. However, with that, there is a bit of a weird thing where they're trying to figure out, like, well, all of our equipment's down. How do we come up with a new weapon? And like, let's go to the Legendary Ranger base. And I'm like, no! Mixed thoughts on this. This is a weird thing to have a nitpick thing about. I'm not, like, mad about it. But they basically watch a couple clips of previous Ranger weapons to try to figure out what kind of weapon they could maybe recreate. This leads Zato to bringing up the bikes, which is the decision, how they reach the decision to make the bike, which is kind of neat, but I just felt it to be kind of unnecessary, mainly because it pushed the button for my worry about them relying too much on past references. I don't want this to be like a, look, the show's good because we did a reference. It's a reference. It's good. And I was actually worried that for a second they were going to recreate a past weapon. I'm like, I can't think of anything more shallow than the shallowest suits in Toku, except maybe a shallow weapon cameo. It was harmless, but I felt it was unnecessary. Of note, though, you know, Jaden had his normal voice audio, Tori did, and I was happy that they actually had kind of what I would consider almost a deep cut, because it feels like they avoid the Disney era for Ninja Storm. And then when they did the MMPR clip, Rocky and Billy's voices actually sounded normal, but Tommy's didn't. I stand by the fact that you don't need the voices if you can't get them back, because not about like it's a purist thing, but like the dub voices are just awful. But regardless, it was kind of a neat way to reach the conclusion, but I feel they could have reached the conclusion from dialogue. Like Solon could have said, hey, past Rangers have had weaponized bikes, let's do that, we don't need any shallow references. It was harmless, but I felt unnecessary, a little bit strange. I think the bike is cool, except for the fact that I don't know why it travels in a post-apocalyptic dimension when it fights things. I thought that was kind of strange. But yeah, this episode, overall, I would give it another 3 out of 5. I enjoyed it. I kind of liked the idea of this Ion lesson, overbearing lesson. It was kind of more like, hey, I messed up. I'm gonna make right on it, and there's a little bit of a story behind the bike that's kind of meaningful between friends, and it wasn't like, you screwed up, you should never lie and steal people's gifts. We're like, we get it, Power Rangers, be a goody two-shoes. But yeah, it was an enjoyable-ish episode. Let's get to episode 3 now. Alright, episode 3, Missing Pieces. To start off, something really important I forgot to mention, I liked the joke in episode 2 where Zato thought BRB was burb. I don't know, I just really like that style of humor with Zato, and I realized I forgot to say it right when I booted up episode 3. But for actual episode 3, I have to say right off the bat before I forget it, I really appreciate that this title, Missing Pieces, has a dual meaning, because it both refers to the message they find at the end and how it fits to the other message, and also the missing pieces of their memories. This was kind of one of those episodes where everything clicked together in terms of all the different plots, which was kind of neat. At the same time, though, it was a little convenient. When we start off the episode with the villains finding this memory machine that can mess with the Rangers' memories, so every time they go into battle, they convince them they didn't see a Sporix, but they saw a Pickle Rick! Which, I feel like with a device like that, they could come up with a way smarter plot, but these are Power Rangers villains, so they're playing by, like, G-rated rules. So they could easily just be like, you're not Rangers anymore, leap to your doom, or something. After that, though, we see the Rangers talking at the base about Solon's upgrade, and that ties into a story of they're trying to upgrade Solon's, like, memory circuits, and Solon keeps messing up, so when Solon tries to warn them that their memories are being messed with, they don't believe her. But when we start that scene, though, the Rangers clearly have been in battle because Amelia's like, oh, my shoulder hurts, and she can't figure out why. That made me think this episode would have been a lot more interesting if we started on the Rangers having mysterious incidents because they lost their memories, rather than telling us what was happening right at the beginning. But it leads to, like, Amelia thinking, like, oh, maybe a witch did this because I live next door to a witch, and of course Ollie's like, I don't believe that because I'm an idiot. Like, seriously, being that much of a skeptic in this world makes you the idiot. Sorry, I just really don't like Ollie sometimes. And that leads her to checking out a shoulder video on Buzz Blast, of which just ends up being J-Borg messing up a massage video. Makes me question, why would you post that in the first place if you messed it up? And that leads her to find out that, the reason they posted the massage video is because earlier they were following the Rangers and they saw the battle they don't remember, and they specifically saw Pink hurt her shoulder. And then later that leads them to needing the light Dino key, because when she thought it was a witch, they used that to cure the curse, but it didn't work. But they realized they can cure the curse of the memories with that. So everything kind of clicked together, which was actually kind of neat, and I kind of dug that because it made everything matter, and it was cool. I would say if I only had one complaint about that, it would be that we didn't need to see Pink injure her shoulder exactly. I feel like it would have been enough in the context of Jane and J-Borg's video for them to be like, oh, we've been in battles you don't remember. That must have been how I injured my shoulder. I feel like it was just too on the nose that they actually saw her injure the shoulder, and even Jane and J-Borg saying, this video is for you, Pink Ranger, in some degree. But with all that going on, the search for Rafkon continues, which has been a really nice continuous plot, and Zato goes to check out Rafkon while the other Rangers fight because he wants to see if they got the location right. Again, another situation where but we need you! I'm like, there's 6 of you got plenty! Zato goes, and he finds the 3 suns that are Rafkon, but the planet isn't there. Classic Alderaan mess around. He does find a beacon, which he brings back, and at the end of the episode, they connect that it was from the original signal, or a similar signal to the original signal from the first episodes, and they put them together, and you can hear sort of a signal where they're saying stuff in English. And you can hear, they say, I can definitely hear Rafkon. I'm like, did you not hear the part that I thought I heard where they said something about survivors, like if you survived? So that was interesting. But I liked this episode. The pickle thing was a little bit ridiculous. I know that Weisel is a ridiculous character, but it was a little bit unbelievable. And I get that what they were going for with, they weren't believing Solon because her memory was unreliable. But at the same time, I feel like they should have realized that this whole situation was suspicious. I'm like, you really believe you saw a pickle? It just held the episode back a little bit for me. I mostly liked how everything clicked together. I really liked the continuous Rafkon storyline. I like where we got to with that with a further hint. But the too much coincidences and the way the Rangers didn't believe Solon felt more like plot over character, so that held the episode back a little bit. I would give it a 3 out of 5. I still enjoyed it, though. Right, episode 4, guys, Tiny Trouble. This was the introduction, I've heard it both ways, of the Pockizord, or they call it the Pockizord, kind of like Ankle Zord. And we start the episode with a training sequence, actually, which is really neat. I think we've seen this happen a few times, and I really like that we see the Rangers doing this, except for Ion, what's with this? Ion, I've heard it both ways. Ion, who's eating a bunch of junk food because it's delicious and he feels he already has enough experience, Which, like, the lesson winds up being, oh, I should have listened to experiences and everything, Power Rangers lesson. But I did like that he brought that up because Zato and Ion are more experienced, which I thought is kind of just neat that they brought that up, especially since when Zed came out, the people are like, I can't believe they defeated the Great Lord Zed instead of the MMPR team. I'm like, actually, Zato and Ion are probably better Rangers than the MMPR team were at that point. But then this little mini Pakazord rushes up to the base, and they think it's their original Pakazord, but that is shrunk for some time. Spoiler alert, it's his offspring that is somehow just immaculately concepted. I mean, with stranger things have happened. I mean, Sarah and Ava are having a baby, so, you know, anything's possible. They basically get it wrong, and it kind of ties into Ion's whole experience thing because he believes the whole episode, like, this is the Zord I know, but it's actually not the Zord he knows. Meanwhile, the monster of the week from last week is still there, or the monster of the episode, since there's no more weeks or anything like that, because it survived since Void Knight saved them in episode 3, which was a really cool scene, and I like that continued, even though this episode was separate from 3 and made it feel, like, continuous. Like, that's something I've liked about the episode so far. We'll see where we go as we continue, but even though they're separate, they've all felt a little bit connected. And in the last 2 episodes, it gave this sense of, I don't know, urgency, but completion to Void Knight finishing his machine. Because he almost finishes the machine, and he's like, there's pretty much no sporks left except for the ones the Rangers have, and Mucus, and this monster. And he's about to destroy that monster when he ends up deciding to use the monster to hold the Zord ransom for more Sporix. But at the end of the episode, all he needs is that one Sporix. In my opinion, I mean, there wouldn't have been such the rest of the episode. Should have just killed that monster, and then killed Mucus because he's annoying and I'm done with him, and then he could have gotten the machine. At the end of the day, after the Rangers defeat him, he does charge up the machine, which we'll get to in a second. This episode winds up dealing with, like I said, Ion's lesson of, like, not thinking he knows everything, and he works with Ollie, and together they do find the Pakazord, and we debut it, leading to the Smash formation, which I feel there's lots of dirty jokes that can be had there. Cool debut, you know, kind of a nice episode for bonding Ollie and Ion a little bit. Although Ollie's attitude just still always bothers me. Like, even when Ollie's right and the other person is wrong, I want to take the person that's in the wrong side because he acts so condescending. Meanwhile, you're wrong about the biggest things because you still don't believe in anything in this world. Seriously, that still bothers me. Debut the Pakazord, but then at the very end of the episode, we end on a big cliffhanger because Void Knight's machine is finally done and Santara wakes up. So I think this was one of the strongest episodes. I feel like I'm being a little bit more critical in these episode reviews so far, but I'm going to give this one the first 4 out of 5 just because I thought it was really packed full of a lot of good stuff. Like, we had a good debut, we had some fun, it tied into some of the ongoing things that have been happening in the previous episodes, and it ended on a really nice little cliffhanger taking us into the next one. But now, let's go ahead, we're getting close to midway through to episode 5. Alright, episode 5, Stitching Up, or Stitches, or Lilo and Stitch. So this episode was a little mixed for me, mainly because episode 4 ended off on such a good cliffhanger with the Santara stuff, and we do follow up on that in some interesting ways, but we also mix it with this filler plot, and then like the monster of the week, and kind of like a couple of the episodes so far, it just feels a little bit muddled, and I didn't mind the Izzy prom plot, I just kind of had wished that either it had been before this or after, depending on where the story goes. Mainly because I felt the first 4 episodes had such a good flow in terms of story with very little filler, and like the filler stuff was very minor and it complemented the main episode, whereas this felt more like there was 2 separate things going on and the pacing threw me off. Not to mention, though I didn't mind the story was rather predictable. Like, as soon as Izzy wanted to get the prom dress, or something for prom, and didn't want a dress, I'm like, there's gonna be a mix-up, and something's gonna happen. And then if the mix-up happened, I'm like, okay, either that was meant for Fern, or that was somebody else's dry cleaning or something. Like, I knew exactly how the plot was going to go. You get to meet Izzy's mom, and she, like all the other Dino Fury parents so far, wears a big unnecessary hat. I think she might have stolen it from Ollie's mom because she was missing hers when we saw her. I almost didn't recognize her. I'm like, who is that? Where's the... Is overall that main plot I didn't mind. I thought it was like a fine filler plot. I just didn't like the placement of it in the context of the larger story. Same thing with like the garbage monster. The interesting stuff of the episode was obviously the Santara stuff. She wakes up and she says, like, we're still on Earth. We learn that Void Knight's name is Derek. Derek. But it appears they're from space somehow or something, because they talk about, leaving the planet, although his name's Derek, which makes me think he's from Earth. But I feel like for the moment that squashes the theories about them being Amelia's parents. Amelia's parents' story could still be tied to this, but at the moment that squashes that. But basically, she keeps an eye on Void Knight through like the intercom throughout the episode because he's trying to make a Zord jammer for some sort of final plan. I was really interested in the fact that he was continuing to plan after his goals were achieved. I'm going to assume as of this moment that it has something to do with keeping the Rangers off his tail when he tries to leave. But at the end of the episode, he's like, "Ah, dear, I see you've dressed in your evil garb." And based on that, she's probably totally going to turn into Toki's your villain. I was kind of hoping they were going to go differently and the Toki's your villain was going to be someone different. But she seems clearly more villainous because she's like, "We want revenge for what the humans did." And he's like, "I don't want revenge." And he just wants to leave. So that was interesting. Maybe, again, kind of like with the predictable prom plot, I'm getting writing on the wall. She's going to be villain. He's going to turn anti-hero because she's done gone nuts with revenge. I don't know if they'll maybe both be calibrated, but it was definitely interesting. Like, on the one hand, I like that after she woke up, they slow played it a little bit and they didn't rush, but I was just so excited for answers that I was a little bit taken aback by kind of going into a filler episode right after that for the most part. It's kind of like how they did that Morgan episode right after Glenn went into the trash can. I was like, dude, what happened to Glenn? I was going to give this episode a 2 out of 5 just because I felt that the different plots weren't mixed right for me. But with that being said, the end scene kind of saved it for me. I don't know, I really liked the end scenes for some reason. I thought they were really just kind of like wholesome scenes with a little photo shoot scene with Izzy and Fern. And also I liked the interaction between Izzy's parents. I feel like, unless I'm just remembering it wrong, usually when we meet Ranger's parents, we only either meet one of them because usually the other one's missing. We usually just see them one at a time, so it was kind of nice to get this family interaction between the two of them, especially since I like the interactions between Izzy and Chase. Oh my god, first one of the season, Izzy and Javi. And then when they showed up with the limo and all the Rangers were there and they took the photo together, I don't know, it was just a wholesome cast moment. That bumped the episode up for a 3 out of 5 for me. It kind of made the overall thing more enjoyable. But let's move on to episode 6 and see if we get more about Centara. Right, episode 6, Jam Session. I actually think this episode did a much better job at balancing and integrating the filler and main plots than the previous one did. It's kind of an interesting one to follow that, because you have the plot going on with Void Knight's machine, and the machine is used to block the Zords, and they need a Zord that he hasn't seen before that can't be blocked, and that happens to be the Terra Freeze Zord, which is on the necklace of this guy that's at Buzz Blast that Javi's involved in a plot in. It's another case which I actually feel like, realizing now, I actually feel like Dino Fury does often, is there's a lot of coincidence storylines, like just from the last couple episodes, and I remember there being a couple last season where things line up. It's not like a huge complaint, but it definitely happens a lot. Bottom line is, regardless of all the coincidences that seem to happen, I thought this was integrated a lot better, and the two plots felt like they were running in tandem rather than being these two little separate pieces. I mean, as far as the Javi stuff goes, it was basically a continuation slash sort of conclusion to the arc about Javi's dad being a douche, because he catches him playing guitar and he's like, "Can't believe I'm on Focus Jar playing guitar, I'm just the worst, my hat, I'm getting a medal." That makes no sense. Is it a park ranger? Do park rangers get medals? Javi's dad's still being a jerk about it. I mean, I don't get what's wrong with having hobbies anyway, or having fun. Having Javi's hobbies. Also, I mean, they were clearly setting up for a concert and he was playing the guitar, so it was like clearly related to his job, but it comes up to a resolution later where it's his dad's medal ceremony, and he winds up having to miss it because he has to strike a deal with this douchey guitar lead, or band lead, that is wearing the Terra Freeze key around his neck. And he only agrees to give the Rangers the key if Javi fills in for his guitarist who left. Because his guitarist is like, "Hey look, I have a Hawk hairstyle from Cobra Kai." And the lead singer is like, "Oh, you need to change your hair." I'm like, "You need to change your hair, Bulma." I know they're Power Rangers, but you know what they could have done? Yoink! Here's the necklace. They seriously just could have done that. No big deal. Again, there'd be no plot, and it wouldn't be very Rangerly. They integrated that because they needed the Zord for this situation, and it tied right into Javi's plot, and it gave Javi a nice moment, and it gave a nice resolution to the stuff with his dad. Although at the end he's like, "Well, I guess you were kind of right. I was just playing for fun." What's wrong with that? I also felt it was worth noting there was a nice moment when Jane defended Javi to his dad. I just thought it was a nice moment, because honestly I don't mind Jane and Jayborg. I have my mixed problems with it, but it was a nice, like, rare moment to see her as more of a character than, you know, the comedic cartoon. And of course we do get the debut of the Terra Freeze Zord, which is probably one of my favorite Dino Fury Soldier designs. It's just a really cool mecha, so it was really cool to see it debut. Maybe because it's like a main Megazord rather than a auxiliary, it was a little bit underwhelming, but I still enjoyed it, and like the reasoning for having to have it other than just finding it being that they needed a Zord that couldn't be jammed was kind of nice. We still don't entirely find out why Void Knight needs to jam the Zords, because he basically just is trying to make the plan work and then it doesn't, and that's all that happens with him in the episode. The main big stuff happens with Centara, who's clearly stood after revenge, and she wants to like absorb power of the Sporix Beast to get more revenge, but Void Knight doesn't want revenge and doesn't want her doing that. but when everybody's out, she winds up like absorbing all of it, effectively doing what they did to restore her, but like to absorb the power, and that turns her into the Tokyuger monster. I'll admit, part of me is still slightly disappointed that it wasn't Void Knight accidentally turning into her monster by saving her, but this makes her a little bit more interesting because it gives her some interesting agency with it. And I don't know, I want to know what the humans did to her. I mean, if it was a long time ago, these humans didn't do it to you. Those people are long dead, it doesn't even matter, but I'm curious, and it definitely is setting up an interesting dynamic where Void Knight is clearly disturbed by what she's doing, and it is an interesting twist on the theory everyone had that what was done to her with the sporks would turn her into a monster, and that she's the one that turns herself into a monster and calls herself Void Queen. But a little disappointed also there wasn't a curveball and this wasn't somebody else, and they did something different with Centaura, but it's still pretty good. I would say so far, though, this is my favorite episode of the season because I found it to be the most enjoyable and the most well integrated, like I said, in terms of the different set pieces. On to episode 7. Okay, so, episode 7. This was an Ollie-focused episode, another one that I thought was pretty decently balanced in terms of the filler, character plot, and the main plot of the series. Let's talk about, like, the character plot first. It was Ollie-focused, and it was a long time coming, because this was Ollie finally getting called out for being a douche, for being a know-it-all, and for being very close-minded. His scientist friend is coming to town, and there's a funny moment when he's on the phone with his mom, and she's like, your best friend's coming to town. He's like, you're coming back? It's his scientist friend from this previous thing he worked on. He's coming to be interviewed by Amelia, and he reunites with him, and he starts making fun of Amelia's magnet bracelet. It's like, that's not science. That's exactly Ollie, every episode. And the teacher basically calls him out for being a know-it-all, and for being close-minded, and for not accepting new ideas, and God, it was a long time coming. And, the whole arc, comes to a head when they're working on the pool water scheme later, and Ollie, thinking he knows it all, winds up getting Solon hurt, and it's only through working with Amelia and sort of listening to her ideas that it works out. A little bit cheesy, but this whole little mini arc here was just, like I said, a long time coming for Ollie, because thus far his entire character has been, the future is closed-minded thanks to science. Especially in this universe, it makes him seem even more closed-minded and stupid, considering over 90% of the stuff he dismisses as unscientific and fake has been proven real in the Power Rangers universe. I also thought it was a nice little subtle continuation of furthering the Amelia Oliver, I'll call him Oliver, the Amelia Ollie story in terms of the potential romance. Main stuff going on was Void Queen, who wants to target the humans and hurt them, which is what the pool scheme comes from, and she's basically turning everyone into plants, and Void Knight is feeling remorse because he doesn't really want to hurt the humans, and I just really like this. It's funny comparing this to Stacy and Zenkaiger because they're both generic redemption stories, but this one I like a little bit more because I think the idea of having this villain that was doing these bad things for a good reason isn't as common in PR, and I really like the shift that we're seeing now, even if it is a little bit generic and it's been done before, but I really like that. And the whole episode leads to Void Knight helping the Rangers because he knows the monster's weakness, and he winds up helping them at the end, and they're not sure whether or not to trust him at the end. It was really interesting. I think it made for a really good episode. I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5 too. Again, I thought it was well integrated. This was a good one because I think that it wasn't maybe as smoothly integrated as the Chase episode, but I did feel that the Ollie plot directly related to the main plot, not to mention I felt that this was a, like I said, for the 15th time I've said this, a long time coming for Ollie. So I really like this episode, and I really like what it did for the main plot. But now on to episode 8. Okay, episode 8. This was an interesting one. I thought it was also a pretty good one. A little bit of missed opportunity, a little bit of strangeness, but an interesting one. Because the main plot revolves around Buzz Blast of all things. A little bit more Jane and Jay Borg focused. Their humor can be hit and miss for me, but I really do like the actresses that play the characters. And sometimes the bits are a little too cartoony, sometimes they're a little ill-fitting, but there's also some funny beats. Like in this one when Jay Borg put on the mask and scared Jane. I thought that was pretty funny. Or when Jane was pretending the tape of her was her sister. She's like, no, that's my sister. She lives in New Zealand. Another New Zealand call out. But I thought it was kind of interesting to sort of put the spotlight on Buzz Blast because the main plot was they're doing their 10 million subscriber live stream, and this hacker hacks him with these terrible jokes that Ion really likes. As a side note, Ion's been really interesting these last few episodes. I did kind of find him being amused by the bad jokes to be funny, but I still like Ion. I like his energy, I think he's fun, but I feel like in the last few episodes, or this season I guess so far, he's been kind of obnoxious and he like getting in the way almost with it a little bit. And meanwhile, Void Knight is incognito and probably the worst disguise I've ever seen. Bright purple, you got 2 random Chewy sashes, and he's got a fanny pack. And all I could think about was the scene from Deadpool talking about the fanny pack. But he pulls a drone in to buzz blast a spy on the Rangers, and like later when they're trying to figure out who the hacker is, Jane and Jayborg think that's from the hacker. I thought that was going to amount to more, because when that first happened, I'm like, oh, this is going to be another episode where they do a really good job of integrating the 2 plots. Because I thought that, like, at the end they were going to be like, well, we discovered the hacker was this other person, but we also found this, and it's traced to this person. And I thought that Jane and Jayborg were going to accidentally find out where Void Knight was. Anyway, in regards to the hacker plot, it turns out to be this little girl who did the hacking. They meet at the park when they recognize the park, because they're analyzing the footage from the hacker video, and Emilio's like, I recognize that. That's from the Dino Chart episode with the kid. And they go to look there, and that's where Ion runs into this girl and makes her agree to confess and to do better in recognizing her talent and that she could change. And she comes clean, and then she does wind up getting a job. Bit of generic cheesy stuff. Void Knight gets another chance to show the Rangers that he's on their side, because throughout the episode they're discussing whether or not he could change. And then he shows up again at the end to help the Rangers, but they won't agree to believe him until he helps get the other Sporix. Zeon, that's their ship name. Zato says, like, I'm not gonna, believe you until you bring the Sporix back. I honestly thought he was gonna say, till you give me the armor back, which would have been a lot easier thing to do to prove that he's on their side. That wouldn't take so much time. And thinking about it, sort of positioning Void Queen as the new villain for season 2 and switching the role of Void Knight, I like the way they did it, because it reminds me of how they've done a lot of the season 2 super seasons, where the second season might have a different antagonist or an antagonist structure. But I like the way they did it this time, is instead of like, oh, Void Knight's defeated and she just appears, like they had this transition period where things were kind of business as usual for the first few episodes, and now it's different, and it's placing Void Knight in a really interesting place. And I'm really curious to see where it goes, especially if the power-up armor ties to Red's power-up armor, and he might eventually become brown, like maybe they give him one at the end. I don't know. I'm really invested in that. I think there was a missed opportunity. I think this is what they were going for in regards to the hacker girl and Ion, in that he saw something in her and proved that she could change, and like the theme that people can change in redemption. I think that was meant to tie into Void Knight and the discussions they had about Void Knight throughout the whole episode. But, I mean, because sometimes I hate when they're too on the nose, but I feel they could have had a discussion about that at the end and maybe spent a little more time on that and integrated it nicely, because I think that was kind of a cool way of integrating the plot of the week with your main thing with Void Knight. As a total side note, I found it kind of ridiculous that they're like having so much trouble believing Void Knight would be helping them after this, and yet they had no problem believing the whole Pickle thing. I mean, I get it. It's Pickle Rick! Anyway, this episode was a 3 out of 5. I still liked it, but I felt that it was it could have been put together a little bit better. But, all right, on to the next. All right, on to episode 9, and what I think was the strongest episode in the season so far, not to mention probably one of the strongest episodes in the series overall, as this was Void Knight's sort of big redemptive moment combined with the debut of the Dino Knight armor. There was a small filler story about Jane and Jayborg seeing this ghost and this small investigation they launched into it, which they had a resolution to at the end that it was just this fake thing put on by a magician. But that little filler story not only wasn't too intrusive, but it had a point in the story, because the main point of the story is Void Knight's redemption and them getting to believe Void Knight. Because Void Queen has created a new robot, Snag Eye, which is one of the main villains from Ryusoulger. He's kind of a main villain suit. He does get destroyed here. We could see him resurrected in the future, who knows, because I think there's a little more footage of him, but he was Ryusoul Black's mentor in disguise in the source footage. But they created him here, and it's interesting just of note that they packed Void Knight's Battle Attackers figure with Snag Eye way back in Season 1. I just think that's kind of funny the way that wound up mattering in some way. But anyway, basically that monster is designed to literally capture the Rangers, like it can digitize them and put them in this little prison on them. And Void Knight warns the Rangers about him, but it's Zato that doesn't want to believe him. They've been discussing this for a couple episodes now, and they're kind of going back and forth. For whatever reason, Zato is extra adamant. I was thinking, like, he's one to talk about, Void Knight causing all this damage because of what he did, since he was one of the ones that voted for the Sporix to be created. But perhaps he's kind of projecting his own guilt in a similar role. Maybe that could have been played better. But regardless, they needed somebody to be against it, and I guess they kind of wanted a big resolution to him coming around with him actually getting the armor back. But he doesn't believe him throughout the whole episode. And Void Knight finally explains, like, everything that happened. That my wife was hurt, I needed the Sporix energy to save him, but things went out of control. I did bad things to get it in the meantime, but she wants to do really bad things, basically laying down the backstory. We don't find out the why or where or whatever of how she got hurt or who did it, but he lays down basically what we know as the audience to the Rangers. And most of them get captured except for Javi and Zato. But then Zato gets captured, and he thinks it's an ambush because Void Knight and the monster are there at the same spot. But then when Zato's like mind reading the monster, you can see that Void Knight is helping. And when Void Knight then winds up being the last man standing, and he is having a really hard time. He's like on the verge of being defeated, but he's able to deliver this final blow that damages the trap. Zato gets out, and then that's when Void Knight gives him the armor back, which was a really nice moment. Like, basically, Void Knight's not able to fight anymore, and, he reveals, like, oh, I found the Dino Night Morpher and key, and I used it to make my armor, which we sort of knew a version of that, because when we first saw the armor, Zato said, how'd you get that armor? I kind of wish that it had been mentioned a little bit more, especially because then Ion's later like, where'd you get that armor? I'm like, wouldn't have he recognized Void Knight's armor too? It's not a huge deal. It's a very small nitpick, but I think that could have been mentioned a couple more times just because of the significance of it. But I like that they addressed it again, and it's kind of like an inverse of what happened in Ryusoulger, because in Ryusoulger, when Nada sacrificed himself, the Geizorg armor went on to create the power-up, but in this one, the power-up was the original form used to create Void Knight and then given back to him, so it's kind of this inverse and then this little cycle. But it was a really nice moment that felt like it was the culmination of Void Knight's story, not only in the last few episodes and this season in general, but from the story from the beginning of the series. And it was a great debut for the armor, one of my favorite power-ups, battleizers, whatever you want to call it, of all time. Just really, really awesome. And then, Void Knight comes out at the end in his human form, and like everyone's shocked to see that he looks human, and then he gets taken by Void Queen. So we'll see what happens there, probably as a way to keep him off the board for a little while in case they do decide to do Ryusoul Brown or something, but we'll have to see. But I wanted to say, going back to that ghost story for a second, I mentioned that was like the only filler thing going on, but it had a point. When Javi was talking to Zato about Void Knight and potentially trusting him, he brought up that, previously Ollie was always really against ghosts and investigating that, or even the idea, but now he's helping Emilia, and he's being much more open-minded as a result of his arc, and that his dad changed as a result of that arc. And I think that was really nice, because this episode, I think in particular, what made it so good is not only the good story stuff with Void Knight and the good Battleizer debut, but it felt like the culmination of all the story and all the character story. Like, most of the individual episodes had kind of contributed to this theme of redemption. And maybe I'm reading too much into it too, but also the theme of people make mistakes and they can right them with stuff like what Ion did and whatnot, and the hacker girl. And so I think thematically a lot of the stuff was leading up to this, which is what made it so good. Not to mention also the scenes when he gave him the armor. From the moment Void Knight handed Zato the armor, the score was on point all the way through the battle. Just really great. Leaves it off on a good note. And again, that little filler story wasn't intrusive, and it tied into the overall theme. Easily my favorite episode. I'm going to be extra generous and give this one a 5, just because I think this is one of the strongest ones, and it's got me hyped up to watch the last 2. Speaking of, let's head into them. Alright, episode 10, our penultimate episode of the mid-season. It's not really a penultimate episode, but a little bit more of a filler episode. Only a little bit, because we did debut our Ultrazord, technically 2, but it's wrapped in this filler story. But I still found it to be a mostly decent episode, and the filler plot did not go the way that I thought. Ion and Izzy are racing bikes, and they're kind of being competitive, and Ion accidentally bumps into her and causes her bike to be destroyed. Destroyed, classic Power Rangers. But that's what happens there. And they're kind of bickering over it, and they find this old Area 62 truck where Izzy finds a case, and she's like, oh, it's mine, finders keepers, we're competitive, and it's just a collar. And the collar actually turns out to be something found by Mucus that can make monsters grow big, instantly. And then Ion finds his own case, which is cash, and they argue over who keeps it, and he's like, well, you said finders keepers, so I get to keep it. This story did not go the way I thought. It was kind of more about the bickering between friends and apologizing to each other there, and Ion kind of realizing that buying things doesn't make you feel better, and giving does to a degree, but it wasn't as clear-cut of a lesson as I thought. Low-key, as soon as they opened the box, I thought, oh, they're gonna have a dumb thing about, you gotta find the rightful owner of the money. That sounds like a bad thing to make fun of, but seriously, this money's probably been sitting there for decades. And they never gave the money back. Ion spent it all, and sure, he gave it to a bunch of randos, but still, the lesson or lessons within it went different than I thought. There's been a couple little plots within this season so far that I've been able to instantly call everything that went down, and I was pleasantly surprised that didn't go down this way, and it both kind of portrayed them not in a negative light, but in a very human light, and I kind of appreciated about this story and about the most recent stories. about some of the most recent stories because they've kind of had the characters behaving more human-like. Like, if an MMPR character found this case, they'd be like, "We gotta get this back to the owner or donate it to charity immediately!" But basically, Ion is taken out of the situation when they need help in this Megazord fight. He pulls a classic Tommy and his communicator's in his bag the whole time. The fight happens because they they bring out the sister of the greatest monster of the week of all time, Dragnarok, and they even make a callback to the fact that no one can remember their name. And they do the formation where it's like the T-Rex Zord with the Pocky gloves and a bit of the ice armor, and they call it an Ultra Zord. You can't just call everything an Ultra Zord. When everyone's an Ultra Zord, no one will be. The end resolution is they need a new formation that's strong enough, and it was funny because Solon's like, "We need to find a formation." He's like, "I think I might have found one." I'm like, "Wait, Zato should recognize this, right?" And he does recognize that, and it's the Primal Ultra Zord. Badass Ultra Zord name. The Primal Ultra Zord is the Ultra Zord we've been seeing in flashbacks, and he brings up the last time the power was improperly calibrated and it caused them to lose. But they fix it, but they need Ion's key, but that's how we get the debut of the Primal Ultra Zord. Great looking form, awesome name. Like, we have a lot of ones called Ultra Zord in this series, but this is like the Ultra Zord, and it's got a great name. And it all amounted to what I thought was an overall pretty decent episode. Kind of split down the middle with a little bit of a filler story and a little bit of like a main story because we're debuting the Ultra Zord with kind of the Void Knight Centaura stuff happening in the background where she's not telling the villains where they are. But I thought this was a standard 3 out of 5. Like, the filler story wasn't that great, but I was surprised that it didn't turn out to be as goody two-shoes as I thought. And the Ultra Zord debut was pretty cool with a kick-ass name. And now we are headed to the mid-season finale. Okay guys, mid-season finale. Last individual episode we'll be talking about for this run, and then I will give my overall thoughts in the next little segment. I was actually kind of worried about this episode. Description primarily mentions the talent show, and I was worried it was going to end on a fillery note. And I couldn't help but think of something some people have said to me about, you know, the hiatus sometimes bothers them because the episodes won't end off on a mid-season finale feeling thing. And I can see what you mean. With this episode doesn't necessarily feel like a mid-season finale cliffhanger that a lot of shows would leave off on, but I think it's worth keeping in mind. I mean, this episode actually had more depth to it in terms of the story than I thought it was going to, but it's worth keeping in mind in regard to episodes they leave off on. Sometimes with these type of shows, they don't leave off on that monumental of an episode. Watching Pokemon on Netflix now for the past couple years, sometimes they will leave off on a random episode. Like, you could have a really plot-driven episode, and then the next episode's about chasing a Clefairy around a field. So that might just happen. I just wanted to address that at the beginning. The main filler plot was about Chase being in the song contest, and that blue-haired guy stole his song, and he's got to figure out a new one. And that was all, you know, it was fine. Pretty generic. It was a little bit of a nice continuation of Chase's story from the season and the series overall. It was nice to see his dad be more supportive, seeing that development there. He was funny at the end. And Javi using all the instruments he's been playing throughout the series was kind of a nice callback to his sort of scatterbrain approach to it. They did try to tie it to the main story that was going on, which was, as we know, Void Queen had Void Knight, and I wasn't sure what they were going to do with him. Are they going to keep him off the board? Is he going to escape? I thought in the back of my head they might turn him into a monster, and that's what they did. I don't remember the name of this dude in Re-Soldier, but it's another Re-Soldier general. But she basically does the same thing to him that was done to her, and turns him into Void King, this new monster where he's basically just a vessel of, like, evil for him to attack for Void King, for Void Queen, too many voids, for Void Queen to command. And that sort of also confirms that a lot of what Santara is doing is based off of her mind being warped. Like, we know she was more revenge-minded than Tarek. Also, his name's Tarek, not Derek. I misheard it a bunch of times. Except for when she turned into that monster form and I thought she called him Terry. I'm like, I thought his name was Derek, but it's Tarek. So past me got it wrong, but it's Tarek. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, yes. Like, you know, she was a little bit more warped than him, but she clearly went off the deep end once she mutated with the Sporix, so this just kind of confirms that. I think that's an interesting direction. It does stall, like, the redemption or whatever a little bit, but I don't mind it because it kind of just adds to Void Knight's overall story and development, in my opinion. Because, again, hot take, I think this is better than Stacy's redemption because it was better paced, and we didn't walk right to the redemption and just keep going back and forth, back and forth. This is the one back and forth, but it's a little bit different. That's for a different time, though. Anyway, I think it was an interesting twist, but the main thing is that he can, like, copy Zato's attack, so he's trying to figure out a way to counter that, and it kind of ties into the whole copycat theme of that guy stealing his song. It doesn't always work. I'll say, most of the episodes I've watched, they try to somehow tie the filler plot to the main plot, and it doesn't always work. Sometimes it's forced, sometimes it creates coincidences, but I'll have to give him credit for trying that because it makes the episode feel more cohesive as a whole rather than different pieces that are just put together randomly. Javi winds up transforming into the Dino Knight armor to help him fight himself. I don't know how he knows his moves. It was a cool idea. I honestly don't remember the Ryusoulger footage from this. It was clearly Ryusoulger footage because they're going back and forth between this tree line in New Zealand and the classic Cory fight, which was very jarring. I wish they could have just picked one or the other, but setting aside the Sentai context, of which I do not remember, I thought that was a cool idea. That would be actually really cool to see later. You know, if it doesn't create a different armor, it would be awesome to get US exclusive armors like this for all the 6 Rangers, but I wouldn't mind seeing like Amelia or Ion transform into this armor later in the series, just for the fun of it. Like, it doesn't look different, but just the concept, it was kind of cool. He winds up defeating him, and then you have, you know, not defeating him forever, but defeating him for the episode, and we just kind of end there. We end on the happy note of the contest, and Void Knight's been turned evil again. It doesn't feel like a, you know, call to action, like, get ready for next season, but at least I think with the major Void Knight stuff, it made it end on a more monumental episode than if this had just been about the chase stuff. But I overall thought it was a decentish episode. I give it a 3 out of 5. But now I'm going to go over my overall thoughts and sort of odds and ends and little stuff. As far as odds and ends and little stuff, there's just a couple things that I forgot to mention in various reviews that I wanted to bring up. I remembered when I was just talking about the last episode that during the episode, penultimate episode, when Ion was unable to get contacted, how did he not see the giant monster raising up in the sky? I just thought about that. That happens a lot in Power Rangers. Like, when they're like, oh, we needed you for the Megazord battle. Like, it's supposed to be a smallish town. Even if it wasn't a smallish town, if a giant monster, you totally would have seen it. Also, there was a scene, I don't remember which episode it was, but when Void Queen was calling out the monster, she said, I need you guys to supervise, and Mucus said, I'm gonna ultravise. Reminded me of not Ultra. And for the last little, like, mini detail, in the episode with Izzy and Fern on the prom, when they were walking together, they were talking about this fake streaming show, and they talked about Steel Silva. I don't remember what they gave Steel his name, and he was, like, the star, and like, isn't he great? I'm like, yeah, I think he's great now. You should have seen him a couple years ago when he was cool. Oh, and I almost forgot, the judges in the final episode, their first names were all the names of the writers. Nice little Easter egg. And I don't know why the middle judge named Becca had it out for Chase. Like, during the whole thing, every time Chase was on stage, she was like, and even when, like, he won and he did good, she was like, I go, what's wrong with Chase? Oh, I mean, Javi. It's probably because I was calling him the wrong name. She was looking at me. Overall thoughts. This wasn't perfect, but I overall really enjoyed this half season. I would say, as some overall negatives, you know, some of the moral messages and character stories sometimes feel a little bit forced, sometimes feel a little bit outdated. Not necessarily the message always, but the way it's approached is a little bit outdated. There is some balancing issues at times with the way things connect. Sometimes too many coincidences, sometimes trying too hard to force the two stories to connect together. But other than that, I really enjoyed this half season, and I'm really pleasantly surprised because in the last couple years with Ninja Steel and Beast Morphers, I was pretty good with the first seasons, and then the second one's kind of dropped off. But I think this second half so far not only continued the quality I liked from season 1, but has made it better. I'd say that this is the most serialized the show has been. Like, there are some fillers in there, but every single episode contributed to a larger story, and there was a direct through line, which is something Power Rangers has had a problem with in recent years, and even Sentai has, where they'll do a plot episode, and then you'll have like 9 episodes of nothing, and they doesn't even mention the story, and then you'll get to the story point. But in this one, I could feel the direct through line, not to mention not only the direct through line of the main story, but the character stories I felt all mattered, is that I felt we were following continuous character stories for all the characters that got focused. And like I mentioned in the Void Knight episode where he got redeemed, I like that those character stories had a thematic purpose to the overall main story. I'm not saying this is perfect, but I really liked this, and this is not, again, not perfect, but I think this is actually one of the best balances we've seen with Power Rangers with filler and story, in my opinion, especially for the last few years. You know, Power Rangers and Sentai has always had filler, but this is one of the, I'm not saying it's all top tier quality, but I'm just saying the balance is actually really well struck, where it felt like a continuous story and I wasn't watching too many valueless filler episodes, is even the filler episodes all contributed to a character arc. It wasn't perfect, but I enjoyed it. If I had to give an overall score to the season, I would give it a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. Not perfect. We didn't get any Morphin Masters teases. We didn't get any Lord Zed teases. I was more, if anything, disappointed at no Morphin Masters, because then I can't make 14,000 Morphin Master Theory videos for you guys. No, but I was hoping to maybe see a little bit of that. With Zed, I'm not so much excited to see what happens next as I am curious, but I do actually appreciate that outside of that little random clip show, that this season was focused on Dino Fury's story. Like, I'm looking forward to learning more about the Morphin Masters lore. I want to see what they do with Zed, but this half season was about Dino Fury and Void Knight and all that, and I liked that. So I really enjoyed it. I am stoked for the second half of the season. What did you guys think? And if you happen to stay this long, or you fast forwarded to this point, I want to know what you think of this format, or would you prefer I just watch all the episodes and then just talk about them all at once? Let me know in the comments as always. Thanks to those of you that watched any part of this very long video. I am now going to edit, which you are already seeing the results of. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell to see notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.